Jameson, brother, how you doing, man?
Not bad, keeping busy.
Yeah, especially now, it's like this mini bull market's back.
That's always good for business when you're in the business of security.
Of course, security is always a good business, which is the reason why you and I are talking today. Um, because there's two things. Number one, I've been noticing lately that a lot of people have been getting phished, and
hmm
specifically getting phished from social engineering and having their login or so-called security feature as a text message. And I know you've had personal experience and you wrote an excellent Medium post about this, going through what happened to you and what you took in order to make sure that your privacy stays intact. And obviously privacy means security and safety for your well-being. However, what I want to talk about today is what are things that people have to look out for, and what are things that people can do today? Like, what are some small, simple security measures? Obviously not bulletproof, but it can greatly help them out in keeping their safety.
Well, it depends on how much do you want to focus on the crypto side of things versus just cyber security in general.
I think we can do like a little bit of both. I think since we're both in the crypto space, I think a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, having issues or getting phishing on exchanges, or they're getting manipulated, or people are doing social engineering with their cell phone providers. So we can touch base on that, and I think it's a great overlap into just general security. It's your web browsing history, Gmail, Chrome, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of related. Basically, the advent of these crypto assets have exposed flaws in these systems that have been there all along, but there was never quite the same level of incentive for people to exploit them. And so we're seeing these issues with the various mobile phone providers, at least in the United States, where it's very easy for someone to take over your account with very little information. Apparently this is not a big issue, at least in Europe, because they have more strict lockdown on your mobile accounts for whatever reason.
And so, if people aren't familiar, can you kind of just briefly describe how people are porting or getting other people's access to their cell phone?
Basically the issue seems to be that we are, very customer service oriented in the United States, and the customer service agents at all these telephone companies are more than happy to help people move their phone numbers around, transition between different providers, and as a result, they make it very easy for an attacker to do the same thing, but of course pose as a user, give a little bit of personal information, which in many cases can be easily found online, and then they transport the number over to the attacker's phone, and now the attacker can basically assume the mobile phone identity of that person. And that becomes an issue if you're using your mobile phone as a two-factor authentication for various online services. It's even worse than that, because many services use your mobile phone for account recovery.
Mm.
So basically, the attacker may not even have your username and password or much other information on you, but if they can get your phone number, there's usually several services they can go around to, including your email service in many cases, and they can say, "Hey, I am you, but I forgot my login information, but I can do an account recovery because I have my phone here, right?" And so the service will then send a link or some other information to that phone number. The attacker can then take over your email and other accounts, and then little by little work their way through your entire online life, and try to get as much information, as much valuable assets out of you as possible.
And so basically, I just want to kind of recap. So once they have your phone, they'll go to your whatever Gmail, say I've lost my stuff, and most people have their phones as like their backup. And I guess they send a code to the phone, which they use to access your Gmail. And I'm pretty sure then they can do the same process for a crypto exchange, where they can go to the crypto exchange and say, "Hey, I forgot my password," but now they have access to your email and your phone.
Yep. Yeah, and really, the best way to figure out if you're susceptible to this is to just try it yourself. Log
Mm.
out of your email account, log out of your Exchange accounts, and then go through their processes of account recovery and see, what would it actually take for a random attacker to get into your account.
And so, what are kind of some simple strategies people can do today to kind of mitigate what's with these security flaws?
Well, the most important thing is to not have phone-based account recovery enabled on any services.
So, you're specifically
Preferably
talking about text-based recovery.
correct. Anything that is sending information to a phone number.
Okay.
Um, it's also a generally good idea not to do two-factor authentication via SMS. Sending those rotating codes, basically. If you're gonna do stuff with your phone, then you should be using what's called time-based one-time passwords, which is like Google Authenticator, which is just an app that's running on your phone, but it's not actually tied to your phone number.
Hmm.
That way, someone can take over your phone number, but they don't actually have the private information that's inside of that app that creates those rolling codes.
Hmm.
Other than that, like I said, if you're not in America, you might not have to worry about the phone porting option. But the two things that you can do to really try to secure your mobile phone, uh, the first would be to not have a phone number that's actually tied to your name. This can be a little tricky, but basically, if you can go buy SIM cards, anonymously, and then use that SIM as your phone number, then it's not tied to your name. There's if the phone company doesn't know that you are this SIM card user, then there's no way for an attacker to call the phone company and say, "Hey, I need to change the SIM for this phone number tied to this person's name." So there's that, and then there is just trying to find mobile phone companies that don't have these gaping holes where they're getting socially engineered all the time. The only one, at least that's available to Americans that I'm aware of that has not had these attacks, would be Google Fi, and that's because it's basically a Google Voice number, and they don't have stores. They don't even really have a whole lot in the way of customer service for you to be able to port a phone number. It basically has a very hard requirement on every Google Fi account that you have to know the PIN that you put in when you set up the account in order to be able to transfer the number over. So there's no means of socially engineering your way through that process.
And then would you recommend, for example, your social media profiles and everything you're using online to use? Obviously, if you can get this, separated burner phone, let's call it, but to implement a 2FA within a Google Auth system as opposed to SMS.
Almost anything is better than SMS. The best thing, but of course a lot of services don't support it. The best thing is to have hardware-based authentication. So U2F
Oh, the YubiKeys.
specifically, the YubiKeys,
Yeah.
even actually Trezor and Ledger devices support U2F.
Hmm.
So you can use those as well as two-factor authentication. But if the service you're using doesn't support that, and really it's usually only the extremely popular services or the extremely sensitive services like crypto exchanges, then you'd probably end up having to go with something like the more popular TOTP standard, which is what Google Authenticator does.
And beyond that, beyond just getting a burner phone and doing 2FA, which is a massive upgrade in existing systems and security, um, do you have any recommendations when it comes to like VPNs and browsers? Like, what are things people can do to protect their privacy online?
Yeah, just from a really high level of day-to-day internet use, I recommend installing a number of browser extensions like uBlock Origin and Privacy Badger and HTTPS Everywhere that will help lock down your browser usage and help keep you more secure and help keep you from leaking too much data. Also, you want to use a password manager, something like 1Password or LastPass. I mean, there's a number of different password managers out there, and almost, they all have pros and cons, but almost anything is going to be better than using your brain. If you're using your brain, you're going to be reusing the same password all over the place, and it's basically guaranteed that over a long enough period of time, your passwords are going to get leaked. You're going to be putting a password into some service that has terrible practices on their back end, and they're going to get hacked, and your password is going to get leaked at some point. So you can at least minimize the damage of the fallout when that does happen, because every time this happens and some major provider gets all of its usernames and passwords compromised, then these dumps of databases start being passed around on the dark web. And inevitably, what we would see when we're running security services is we see all these bots start hitting our login endpoints on popular web-based services, and they're just going through a list alphabetically of all of these usernames and passwords that got leaked and trying to see if any of them got reused. And so it's basically an inevitability, and if you want to protect yourself from it, then you can ensure that if your password does get leaked, then it's not going to result in people being able to get into your other accounts as well as the one that actually got compromised.
Do you have any recommendations when it comes to stuff like Protonmail?
I mean, I am a fan of Protonmail. You're going to be giving up some usability as a result. I mean, this is something I was just talking about recently. Is Google, as terrible as it is because it's sucking up all our data and compromising our privacy, it is extremely user friendly, and it's great how like all the services integrate with one another. Like you get an email with a calendar invite that's like embedded in it, and it automatically shows up on your calendar as soon as you accept it, and integrates with their mapping system, all this other stuff. And Protonmail, on the other hand, much more secure, and theoretically they don't even have access to your data because it's all getting encrypted on the back end and only decrypted when you're accessing it. But even like the search function inside of Protonmail is not very good, and so it's even hard to like navigate through some of your old emails and figure out what was going on. So like for me, I tend not to use Protonmail for everything, but I just use it for the more sensitive things that I would care more about if they got leaked.
And what's your recommendations for like VPNs?
For what again?
VPNs.
Yes, there is. There's no like one size fits all VPN. Because there's so many different factors that are involved. If I can remember, I have it linked off of the Epic post that I made, but there's this website. I think it's called thatoneprivacysite.net.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go on there, they have this Epic VPN comparison, and I think it's got probably 100 plus, it looks like 180 different VPNs on it, and it shows you this breakdown of like all the different types of threat vectors that you might want to care about. And long story short, there's no like one single VPN that is perfect with regard to all of these different privacy and security considerations. So it depends a lot on like what jurisdiction you're in, what jurisdiction you would prefer the VPN company to be in, and like who you think they may be sharing data with, how trustworthy they may be with regard to logging, what type of payments do they accept, and how private are those. And so I generally I don't go around and tell people, hey, you should use this one VPN, because there are just so many considerations. If anything, you probably want to have multiple VPNs available. Actually, I have tried out, Protonmail actually has Proton VPN now, and that seems to work pretty well.
Nice. What's your take on Oprah? And I've been hearing a lot of people talking about it, and I know they have a built-in VPN as well.
Yeah, the browser.
Yeah, yeah.
I actually haven't used it in a number of years, so I'm not as up to date on what they're doing. I have noticed that I think Brave browser started having a Tor option as well. Yeah, because I use Brave on a number of computers, and that is a pretty user-friendly way, I guess, to get onto Tor with just opening up a special tab in the Brave browser.
Mm-hmm. And so, what do you recommend? Yeah, actually, on that topic, what do you like about the Brave browser? Is it the UI, UX? Is the simplicity? Like, what would you say stood out to you when you first used it?
Just how fast it was, because it has its native ad blocking built into it.
Mm-hmm.
I was also using it early on because they were integrating like automatic Bitcoin payments to various entities that signed up, and I thought that was a novel idea of, yeah, sure, I'm interested in blocking ads, but I would be interested in making automatic micropayments to certain providers, um, to try to offset the fact that I'm trying to protect my privacy by blocking all these ads.
I know they have their own token, but it'd be pretty cool if they had the option of like I can switch their token into Satoshis instantaneously.
Yeah, well, I mean, it started out as Bitcoin, and then they went with their own token. And then I actually saw, just in the past few days, an announcement that sounds like they are going to be adding support for a number of different cryptocurrencies. So, not sure how that's going to relate to their token, if it really will be something where you can just swap out whatever your favorite cryptocurrency is.
Interesting. So, besides what you mentioned with getting a burner phone, 2FA with Google Auth, or even better, if you can use a hardware device such as a UB or even a Trezor and a Ledger and VPNs. Is there anything else people should be looking at?
Well, the one thing that I tried to get by on the post that I made was that, if you're going with the VPN route, you need to make sure that you're using your VPN all the time.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to be leaking data some of the time. And when I started out with VPNs and I was just using them like configured on each computer, it became a pain, because I would like sometimes forget to turn on the VPN, or like I would restart the computer
I
and
can
I
relate.
wouldn't realize. And so ultimately, what I did was some experiments where I tried setting the VPN actually at my router level, so
Mm.
that everything that was going through my home network would be on the VPN. And that worked pretty well, but it also became a bit of a pain, because then sometimes the VPN would screw up and the VPN connection would drop, and I wouldn't know,
Mm.
until I would notice, days or weeks later, that I wasn't getting the same amount of "Are you human?" pop up questions, and other types um, of like blocking that some services do for VPNs, because of the abuse that they see through them. And so then I realized, well, I need to go even further down the configuration hole, and I need to change my router so that it blocks all traffic if the VPN client screws up. And then after doing that for a while, I started realizing how often the VPN was screwing up, at least, like every few weeks. I had to go like yet another step and figure out how to set up multiple VPN clients that would like automatically fail over. And so like it became a bit of a chore to set up. And I imagine that, people who don't have a lot of networking knowledge would give up on it pretty easily.
No, I don't think so. That's why I'm a firm believer in what are like small steps, like getting to a FA, the Google Auth. That's a small step. You can do that within 1 minute, right? Uh, Getting a VPN, that's a small step. You can log in and choose one or two VPN providers. Even like other stuff, like talking for privacy is. A lot of people use more and more messaging apps. Is for me, I personally use Signal. There's other ones. People like Telegram. I don't really use WhatsApp for any uh, talk. Security talking. But what's your take on like the messaging apps?
Well, there's also, considerations there. You definitely want to use one that is end-to-end encrypted so that there's no third party sitting in the middle snooping on everything. But
Mm-hmm.
even like you said with like WhatsApp is end encrypted, but there are privacy considerations there because you know that Facebook is sucking up all of the metadata. They may not be able to see what you're actually saying, but
Yep.
they can see what other phone numbers you're talking to and what times you're talking to them and how often, and can extrapolate other things as a result of that and adding it in with other information. And interestingly enough, I was actually a big fan of Signal, but I don't really use it anymore because it requires you to expose your phone number. And
Yep.
one of the things that I've gotten into as a result of all this privacy stuff is using proxies for everything. So
Okay.
I don't even hand out my burner phone number anymore. I hand out proxy phone numbers that forward to my phone number.
Mm.
And the problem with Signal is I can't hand out those proxy phone numbers. It just won't work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the actual phone number that the messages are ending up at their final destination. So from that perspective, I actually like stuff like Telegram more because you can just have a username. You don't actually have to give someone your phone number. Or Keybase is another good
Yeah,
example.
Keybase is good, but their UI UX is horrendous. Oh my God. If they can fix that, I would use Keybase. Yeah.
But I mean, the ultimate messaging app, unfortunately, is not that user friendly. I'm a big fan of Riot and Matrix,
Mm-hmm.
but these, in order to use them really well, you basically have to be connecting to your own custom identity server, and you have to be manually checking public keys as you're adding people to your list of contacts. And so once again it's that privacy and convenience trade-off. But that's what I think all of the decent security companies in the space moved away from Slack a while ago because it's just wide open, and there's too much risk there, and have taken their communications in-house with stuff like Riot, Matrix, and Spider Oak is another one that has some end-to-end encrypted apps, but it's not quite as user-friendly in my experience.
Cool. Any last words? I think we wrapped everything up pretty good. I want to kind of make a summary is if you're using SMS, remove that ASAP, use 2FA, Google Auth, or hardware key. Ideally, if you can get a burner phone, a phone that attached to your identity, get that. Pick certain VPNs that you like. You can use Opera, you can use Brave for the browsers, and Protonmail has its pros and cons, as you mentioned. Are we missing anything else?
Um, I mean, the main thing is you can learn a fair amount if you just do a few hours of research or if you read that article that I wrote.
I'll
The
make sure.
harder thing,
I'll leave a sorry to cut you off. I'll make sure for everyone listening. I'm going to leave that in the show notes, and I highly recommend you read that piece because you really go into detail of what happened and the measures that you took.
yeah, and the hard thing though is that what we're really talking about here is a lifestyle change. Like you
Yes.
have to get into new habits. And so what I found is getting a new habit going can be a pain. It can take you like a few months basically. But once you get into that habit, then it just becomes second nature.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, for example, we didn't even really start to talk about financial privacy, but another simple way to get a lot of your financial privacy back is to just carry cash and not
Yeah.
use cards that are creating more data trails that can get sucked up and analyzed.
Yeah. Hence why I'm interested to see what happens with Libra, as they're going to know everything that you do.
Well, we won't know for at least another year. I think people are getting upset prematurely about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just look at like your actions speak louder than words, and we've seen what Facebook has been doing. And for me, I understand why they're doing it. I get it. I'm not hating for them on doing it. It's just like I just don't trust them enough. Let me put it that way.
Well, yeah, and of course, Facebook has become so huge. Once again, like we mentioned WhatsApp, there's also, I guess, Instagram. Um, they're just their tendrils are reaching out all over the place, and they've become a lot like Google in that sense, where it's just really hard to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. Cool, man. All right. So if people want to find more information, guys, please check out the blog post. It's in the show notes. And Jameson, if they want to follow you and get to know more information about what you're doing, what's the best resource?
Well, you can find pretty much everything about me on my website, which is lopp.net, LOPP.net.
Awesome. Well, thanks, brother. Always a pleasure, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Talk to you later.